everyone! Today I'm reading chapter 13 of Horrorstör by Grady Hendrix. Chapter 13 is called Crank. This is the crank right here. And the article for that says, "Embrace the simplicity of eternal repetition with crank. A rustic handle mounted on resistance gears to encourage eternal turning. Enter a meditative state of despair after 100 turns, 1,000 turns, even 10,000 turns. The only rule is that it never stops, even when your body does." And then the story begins. Amy didn't stop running until she'd reached the center of the vast, orange-lit parking lot. She caught her breath and looked around for cop cars, but the parking lot was empty. "Oh, come on," she moaned. "Where the hell are you?" Standing in the middle of the empty lot, she could see the headlights of the cars and trucks barreling down Route 77. She could even see the exit ramp leading down to the feeder road. "The address you gave me is invalid," the dispatcher had told her. "It means that according to our system, that address doesn't exist? How was that possible?" Amy ran around to the side of the building, her sneakers slapping warm asphalt, until she reached the distant side lot where partners were required to park their vehicles. There was Ruth Ann's Jeep with its "My Other Car is a Harley" bumper sticker, Basil's Nissan Cube with its TARDIS 1 license plate. There was a third car, a junked-up Subaru that had to be Matt's or Trinity's. Then there was her sad Honda Civic leaking oil. But still no cops. She had no one but herself. Amy fumbled her keys from her pocket and opened the Honda's door. The car buzzed at her as if a door ajar was the most important problem in her life right now. "You're not abandoning them," she told herself. "You're going to get help." It was a smart thing to do. It was a good idea. She locked the doors, started the engine, and pointed her car toward the exit. Then she floored the gas before she could change her mind, aiming for the feeder road that led to Route 77. "Someone has to get out," she said to herself. "Someone has to get out and get help. It doesn't mean I'm running away." But she was running away. That's what Warden Worth's chair had taught her. She was always giving up, quitting early, walking away. It was so much easier not to try. The chair had made it so easy to surrender. At the edge of the parking lot, Amy pressed on the brakes. From there, she watched the lights of the highway, the endless streams of cars and buses and tractor trailers. No doubt a police cruiser was out there looking for an exit its officers would never find. She looked back at the store. From a distance, it didn't seem menacing at all. It was just a big beige box made of cheap materials plunked down in a sea of asphalt. Everything else was smoke and mirrors, a programmed experience. It was easier to see this reality from the outside. It was easy to forget on the inside, and her friends were still on the inside. No, not her friends. They were store partners, not friends. There was a difference, she reminded herself. But Basil had come back. She thought he'd just been repeating a bunch of Orsk propaganda about responsibility, but he'd actually meant it. He'd rescued her from the chair and faced an army of penitents to keep her safe. And Matt had refused to leave without Trinity, and Ruth Ann wouldn't have left without any of them. "They're not your friends," Amy told herself. "You don't have to do this. They're not your responsibility." She closed her eyes and felt the throbbing bruises and cuts from the tranquilizing chair laddered up and down her body. Sitting in the driver's seat reminded her of being back in the chair, and she felt heavy and warm. It was safe with her eyes closed. Her car jerked forward and stalled as her foot slipped off the brake. Amy's eyes flew open. Before she could nod off again, she bit down on the tip of her finger that had lost its nail. Pain screamed down her arm and woke her up completely. Here was the other option, the tranquilizing chair. It was always waiting for her. It always wanted her back. It always wanted her to quit again, to sit down and never get back up. In the end, Amy thought everything always comes down to those two choices, stay down or stand up. She cut the wheel hard, drove back to the main entrance, and parked on a yellow striped patch marked "No Stopping or Standing." She walked to the main entrance and found the doors had closed and dead-bolted themselves. Of course they had. Amy cupped her hands and peered up through the glass at the showroom floor. She could see the shadows coiling around in the darkness, skittering through the aisles, dripping down the walls. The creepy crawlies wanted to be left alone with Ruth Ann, Matt, Trinity, and Basil. Amy had gotten away. They didn't want her back. But hadn't Basil said that the door to the partner's entrance was still broken? She jogged around the side of the building and yanked on the door. It swung open easily, and in the orange light from the parking lot, she could see the time clock on the opposite wall frozen at 3:15 a.m. Just looking into the store again was enough to make her heart race. This was her last chance to turn back. This was her last chance to act like a smart person. She could smell the sour, swampy stink of the store, and the air pouring out the door was cold and stagnant. Before she could change her mind, she stepped inside. Her first stop would be the break area. That was where they'd all planned to regroup. Even if no one was there, she could find flashlights, first aid kits, useful things. Holding up Basil's cell phone to light her way, she turned it to the left and saw the base of the stairs leading up to the second floor. Amy forced herself to head toward them and then jumped when the door behind her slammed shut, sealing her inside. Basil's cell phone cast a watery digital glow over the walls as Amy made her way to the stairs, her senses hyper alert. At the top, she turned down a hallway lined with office doors. Each was hiding something. Each was on the verge of swinging open and showing her something she didn't want to see. In the cell phone's glow, she saw that the walls were riddled with cracks, weeping water, their paint bubbling, flaking, sloughing off, and peeling to the floor in drifts. Something darted across the floor, another rat, wet and filthy, racing along the edge of the wall and vanishing into darkness. Amy forced herself to calm down. Rats were the least of her worries right now. They were just more scripted disorientation. She breathed deeply and continued down the hallway, and then she heard it, a gentle scrape from behind one of the doors. There is no point in being scared anymore, Amy told herself as she watched her hand reach for the handle and turn the knob. The door swung open. Inside was a supply closet filled with reams of paper and black markers, staplers and printer ink cartridges, everything lined up in neat and orderly stacks on the shelves. But at the bottom of the back wall, a hole had been torn in the drywall. It was surrounded by scratches, the edges smeared with something dark. A cold, rancid wind vented from the void, and something on the floor caught her eye. Amy knelt down and picked it up, a small tube of Blistex medicated berry lip balm. Amy dropped it and backed into the hall. She had a feeling that the break area was going to be empty when she got there, and she was right. The first thing she did was open the first aid kit bolted to the wall beside the door. Relief washed over her when she saw the yellow flashlight clipped inside. She yanked it out and clicked it on, and suddenly the room was full of daylight. Amy slid Basil's cell phone into her pocket and ran her flashlight over the walls. She checked under the arsal tables just to be sure. No rats, no men in striped pajamas, no Matt, no Ruth, Anne, no Trinity, no Basil. Something cold and wet touched her skull, and she ducked to escape it. Whirling around with the flashlight revealed more shadows. Something small and silver dropped in front of her. Amy looked up and gasped, then pressed herself to the wall, as far from the center of the room as possible. The stain on the ceiling had grown. It was a huge, pregnant bulge, ripe with yellow water, dripping into a vast puddle in the center of the room. It looked like it was going to rupture at any moment. Runnels of dirty water chattered eagerly down the walls into the bucket of magic tools, streaming over stacks of waterlogged Orsk catalogs, or what used to be Orsk catalogs. Now they were toppled and mixed with yellowing ledger paper filled with precise handwriting. The top sheet was dated May 5th, 1839. In short, this commission found that the Cuyahoga Panopticon is nothing more than a mill for the manufacture of lunatics. Many of the penitents have lost their minds in the numbing grind of repetitive labor. Others have given in to despair and disfigured themselves. The treadwheel has been disconnected from its grinding stone. Penitents who should be employed in gainful labor are sent to the crank until they become too injured to continue, and there is no gainful industry to be observed. Warden Josiah Worth is not only aware of the situation, but seems to revel in it. Our recommendation is the immediate closure. Amy dropped the paper. This information was nothing she didn't already know. There was nothing left to see here. No one was coming. It was time to move on. She took one last glance around the room and noticed that the sign on the wall had changed. Its message used to be, "The hard work makes Orsk your family, and the hard work is free." But the running water had worn away many of the letters. Now it simply read, "Work makes you free." She was nearly out the door when she heard whispering. Someone was close by, a mumbling scratching on her eardrums. She flicked the flashlight around, but she was alone. Then she pressed her ear to the wet wall and whispered, "Hello?" The reply was so loud she jumped back. Hiding, can't find me, can't see me, keep going." The voice was harsh and sibilant. Amy recognized it instantly. "Ruth Ann?" Something thumped and rustled on the other side of the drywall. "Amy!" She pressed her hands to the wall, her fingers clawing helplessly at the paint. "Ruth Ann," she said, "I'm going to get you out of there." "No," Ruth Ann whispered back. "They can't see me in here." "Who can't see you?" "The creepy crawlies." "Did you get in through the closet?" "I made a hiding place," Ruth Ann said. Something sharp scraped against the other side of the wall. It sounded like fingernails, and then Amy remembered the hole scratched in the closet wall and the dark fluid smeared around it. "Are you hurt?" Amy asked. "It hurt at first," Ruth Ann said. "It hurt a lot, but now they can't find me." "Go back to the hole," Amy said, pressing her palms against the wall. "Can you find your way back to the closet? I'll meet you there." Thud. Something slammed into the other side of the wall, knocking Amy back. Ruth Ann gabbled in fear. "They're coming!" "The hole. Meet me at the hole." Amy ran back to the supply closet. She didn't see how she could fit through, but if Ruth Ann could make it, then so could she. She crouched down, ready to crawl through, only to discover that something was already crawling out. A hand, black with grime, wrapped its fingers around the lip of the opening. "Help me," Ruth Ann whispered. "Give me your hand," Amy said. She grabbed both of Ruth Ann's wrists and knew immediately that something was wrong. Ruth Ann's arms were slick with blood and gore, and Amy could barely get a grip. She wiped her palms on her jeans and tried again, pulling harder, guiding Ruth Ann's head and shoulders through the opening. "It's going to be okay," Amy reassured her. "You'll be home on the couch watching Real Housewives in no time. No more creepy crawlies." Amy felt something wrong with Ruth Ann's fingertips. They were hard like calluses, but the nails were missing and all the surrounding flesh was raw. And gouging at a hole, Ruth Ann had worked her fingers to the bone, literally. Each digit ended in a bloody white tip. "Amy!" Ruth Ann screamed. Something had her. She was being yanked backward, back into the hole. Amy grabbed her by the shoulders, but whatever was pulling from inside the wall was too strong. "Hold on," Amy said. "I don't want to see them," Ruth Ann gibbered. "I won't let you go," Amy said. She braced her feet against the wall and leaned back, but Ruth Ann was slipping from her grip, sinking back into the hole, sinking into darkness. "Help me!" Amy dove through the hole head first. Behind the wall was a cramped passage framed by drywall and metal ductwork. It was too low to crawl on all fours. Amy inched forward on her belly, using her feet to propel herself. Ruth Ann was sliding backward, her bloodied hands slapping at the aluminum ducts and failing to find purchase. Amy lunged forward, grabbing her wrist with both hands. The flashlight rolled away, strobing through the passage. "I got you," she said. "I won't let go, I swear." Ruth Ann just shook her head. Suddenly her voice was calm, as if she'd experienced a rush of clarity about her fate. "You're not strong enough." "Yes, I am." "No, you're not. There's one of you and too many of them. But I want you to know something, sweetheart. This is not your fault." Whatever was pulling Ruth Ann pulled harder, yanking her wrists from Amy's grasp, dragging her deeper into the darkness. Amy wriggled forward, but she wasn't fast enough. She couldn't keep up. "Ruth Ann!" she yelled. Her friend didn't seem concerned at all. She was no longer resisting. She had stopped trying to fight. "Don't you worry," Ruth Ann said. "If I can't see them, they can't see me." Then, without hesitation, she hooked her bony fingertips into her eye sockets and raked them down her face. "No!" Amy screamed. She grabbed her flashlight and aimed it into the crawl space, but it was too late. Ruth Ann was gone. All that remained were bloody handprints on the drywall and the sound of a lifeless corpse being pulled deeper into the store. Ruth Ann had hugged her that morning when she thought she'd been fired. Snoopy was sitting on the sofa waiting for her to get home and watch TV. She hadn't hesitated when Carl was hurting himself. She just stripped off her blouse and tried to stop the bleeding. Ruth Ann had been the best of them. Something hardened inside Amy, and she promised herself she would get the others out. All of them. It didn't matter what tried to stop her or what she had to go through. She'd quit on enough things in her life. She wasn't going to quit on this. Whatever had happened to Ruth Ann wasn't going to happen to anyone else. Amy hauled herself out of the hole, scraping the skin off her ribs as she went. She closed the supply closet door gently behind her and made her way through the back of house until she reached the swinging double doors that led to the cafe. She switched off the flashlight and pushed open one of the doors, slipping out onto the floor. In front of her, in the orange glow from the cafe windows on her right, Amy could make out the elevator and stairwell leading down to the market floor. Children's was to her left, and she could see just enough of its shadowy shapes to navigate by. Her guard was down, so when something moved to her right, Amy clicked on the flashlight and pointed it into the cafe. The first thing she saw was a man's back. He was wearing a rough gray coat with wide stripes running across it. As she watched, the figure reached with both arms to his right and took an arseled cafe chair from the man next to him. They held it by the legs at chest height and passed it along as though they were ferrying furniture out of a friend's house. Then the man passed the chair to another man on his left, who passed it to another, and another, and another, all the way around the ring. The sheer number of them took her breath away. She counted 21 before stopping. If there were more, she didn't want to know. The men were ignoring her, passing around at least a dozen chairs in a circle, working rhythmically, mechanically, like pistons in a machine. Something moved in the darkness of the stairwell, and Amy swung her flashlight toward it. 4 of the shadow people were coming up the stairs. They were not quite as scrawny or filthy as the men in the cafe. They wore hoods, and from their belts swung truncheons. They advanced on her as inexorably as robots. Amy knew they were the warders, the guards, the ones who chased down escapees and disciplined troublemakers. She knew they were coming for her. Amy had taken her eyes off the men in the cafe for only a second, but when she turned back, they had placed their chairs on the floor and were all staring at her. The saliva in her mouth went dry and her stomach filled with acid. If she had been able to gather her wits, she would have run, but she felt stunned by the full force of the men's attention. Their faces were the worst. They were smeared, obscured, covered in a black veil, as if something had smudged their features with a dirty eraser, leaving nothing behind but indistinct knobs of shadow. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, no humanity. their individuality rubbed out. Amy looked back at the stairs. The hooded men had reached the landing. Galvanized by their proximity, she turned toward Children's and ran. She snapped off the flashlight, hoping the darkness would hide her. She could hear bodies moving behind her, chasing her. But she didn't risk turning around. She knew exactly where she needed to go. Darting and ducking around furniture, she passed through the dark burrows of Children's, raced into the shadowy towers of wardrobes, skipped past bathrooms, at last making her way to a Finibrum bedroom display. She dipped her flashlight to the floor and scanned the beam around. The ground was covered with dirt, smears of mud, and clots of black filth forming a trail past the Masonic closet organization system, right behind where she started. Opposite the closet, at the end of the narrow, rust-colored hallway, a fake wooden door gaped like a clown's mouth, inviting her inside. Basil was back there. Maybe Matt and Trinity, too. It was too late for Ruth Ann, but Amy could save someone. She had to go. Forcing herself to breathe deeply, filling both lungs with the rank, marshy stench that came wafting on the cold air, spilling from the open door, she ran inside, flicking her flashlight beam around the walls as she entered the heart of the beehive. And that is the end of chapter 13. I'll be reading chapter 14 next, as one would assume. So join me for that next time. Thanks. Bye.